Story 1. I was stranded 20 miles from home in the rain and called my friend Chris to see if he could give me a ride. He called me a taxi to his place, and by the time I got there, I was exhausted, so he let me sleep in his bed while he slept on the couch. I heard a knock at the door and heard familiar voices. Chris was asking them to be quiet because me, was sleeping. They started saying things like, "Hey man, just let me go in and say hi to her." Another friend of his was talking about how all four of them could gang me. At this point, I had my shoes on and I was ready to run, but Chris managed to get them to leave, and after they did, I opened his door and hugged him and thanked him profusely. Needless to say, he was a great friend with some very shitty friends, and that night, he protected me. Story 2. I was living in a mental ward at one point in my life. I had to share a room with two other people, and they were both total freaks. One time, when I was just waking up, I overheard a fight between my two roommates. One of them put on my clothes, and I mean all of my clothes at once, and the other was preparing to strangle him for no good reason. I waited a while to see how it would unfold, but it only escalated, so I got up and out of there in my pajamas to find help as fast as I could. Thankfully, the staff actually did help me. Story 3. When I was sharing a room with my cousin in a rented house at Cape Cod. My cousin, who was prone to dust allergies, usually fell asleep with a nebulizer. I was having trouble falling asleep and was tossing and turning. Eventually, my aunt came into the room to shut my cousin's nebulizer off and started talking to him in his sleep, saying how she loved him but that he was going to hell, that he had to get right with God and fix his behavior, or hell would be all he knew. My aunt was never super religious or said these kinds of things to him when he was awake. So it was just weird to hear her stand over his bed and say it to him while he was sleeping. Story 4. So this one is a little weird, but in 2000 I had surgery. They put me on anesthesia, and I was lying there waiting for it to kick in with my eyes closed. I remember one of the nurses, I guess, saying, "Yeah, he's out. Anyway, this new guy I'm seeing that I told you about, he eats my so good. It's amazing." And I've always wondered if she really said that, or if the anesthetic can make me have auditory hallucinations, as I was a super 22-year-old at the time. I've always wondered if I was just drugged and imagined it, because they injected something prior saying it'd calm me. To this day, I have no idea what it was. Surely nurses wouldn't be talking about oral sex immediately before surgery. I don't remember a damn thing after she said that. Like, I heard the sentence, then went out. For the past 23 years, I've wondered about that. Story 5. First time in the psych ward, just turned 16. I'm bipolar, but didn't know it at that point, and had only been taking Prozac. Not a good mix. Obviously, the first night was the worst, and I did not sleep at all. Around 3 a.m., they put another girl in my room. I pretended to be asleep. Shortly after, I heard her whispering to herself about how f***ed it was that she was there, and about how her family would never talk to her again, etc. Next morning, I asked her what she was in there for while I was brushing my teeth. She proceeded to tell me, in detail, about how she tried to kill her family and run off with her boyfriend. Luckily, she did not succeed, as she was a small 13-year-old girl, and her dad was a pro wrestler. I still quite often think about how she's doing. Story 6. It wasn't so much weird as it was hilarious. But as a kid, we were told to sleep at 9 p.m. every Christmas so that Santa could give us our presents. I knew it was BS, but I went with it just so I can see what I got in the morning. Around 11 p.m., I heard my mom coming upstairs to take presents downstairs and put them under the tree. I guess my stepdad was done with it because I heard him clomping up the stairs in his Rockport boots and my mom whispering, "Oi, Fatso, keep the noise down." Then he grabs a load of presents, accidentally drops one, and starts pushing it along the floor with his feet, and my mom goes, "Pick it up, face." And I just start quietly laughing in my bed. It was so hilarious. Story 7. When I was in college living in the dorms, I had a roommate who was hardly ever around, but when he was, he always had some contrarian to say just for the sake of being condescending. Just an asshole in general, and he'd frequently ask me how I planned on graduating. Granted, I was depressed at the time. I'd binge drink all night and show up to classes hungover, then sleep all day, generally just drowning my woes with booze. I have a blurry memory of coming back from the bars absolutely trashed, not being able to make it to my bed and just collapsing on our couch futon. At some point, my roommate woke up and I was still conscious with the spins, but pretended to be asleep. He proceeded to bring me a bottle of water and covered me with a blanket, stood over me just staring with a sad look, and muttered, "What the f are you doing to yourself, man?" I don't think he would have been so nice had he known I was awake, but it really put things into perspective for me. I was becoming an alcoholic, and everyone seemed to realize but me. Story 8. When I was 17, I was emancipated and lived on the couch of a lady I had met at church. She was allowing me to finish high school while living with her and make it to my part-time job. I thought very dearly of her and for what she was doing for me. I woke up late one day, and she and one of her daughters were talking at the kitchen table. I heard them talking very badly about me, and how they knew I wouldn't be there for long, and that they just had to deal with it for a little while. They said stuff about how I must be schizophrenic. They knew I had an aunt who suffered from this, and that I was damaged from the history of my trauma I had endured, and I wouldn't get very far in life. My heart sank, and I tried so hard to get out of there after that. Story 9. Not pretending to sleep, but similar. I started walking towards my boss's office to check up on something, and the VP of HR was in there as soon as I saw it was busy. I turned around, but neither of them noticed me. Heard the VP, who was in his 60s, commenting on how hot one of the 21-year-old interns was, and then asking how her performance was in the same sentence. Absolutely disgusting, and I'm so glad I don't work at that shithole anymore. Story 10. Worked at a warehouse where I would take naps behind a wall of boxes. One day, I was woken by the sound of kissing. I was a coworker and hourly boss. Normal lovey-dovey type stuff turned into, "I'm pregnant. You can't be." "But I am." "No, you can't be. I'm married." "You said you were divorced." "We are, sort of. You can't say anything. We'll handle it." Felt like I was overhearing a soap opera. Story 11. Anytime my kids are asleep near us or in the car, my wife and I intentionally discuss them but have conversations like, me. "You know, I wasn't sure how, son's name, would turn out, but I have grown pretty fond of him." Her. "I agree. It was touch and go for a while, but I think we should keep him." Me. "What about the others?" Two girls. Her. "Well, they have been getting along lately, and given that they look alike, I say we keep them as well." Me. "Well, we're going to have to work with daughter 2 and her vulgarity problems. Typically, this continues until one of them busts out laughing. Or if they stay completely silent, then we can begin discussing other adult things. If they toss and turn, I'll throw out something like, daughter 1 would look good shaved bald, like a cancer patient. She could make cancer look good. She could make cancer look fashionable. Again, laughing or silence. Then we continue. Story 12. My mom is yelling at her boyfriend for cheating on her. I was 11 or 12 at the time, and wasn't sure what to do, so beyond telling my best friends at school about it, I just buried it and pretended it didn't happen. They broke up a few months later, and thankfully she's now married to someone who loves her very much. There's a lot of conflict that she assumes I was sheltered from, that I was actually exposed to, but I try not to bring it up. She tried her best to give me a normal, healthy childhood. Story 13. Once, we rented an apartment with friends in a small town by a lake. During the day, we were at the beach, and during the night, we were drinking and partying at a small local festival. One night, everyone arrived home at different times after each other. I was the third, and I arrived home to two of my friends sitting in the room next to theirs eating food that was not theirs. I laughed it off and went to sleep on the couch in the living room. They went to sleep shortly as well in their room. Then the rest of the group came home. They discovered that someone pillaged their room and ate all their food and started to investigate. Funnily enough, they overlooked the most obvious solution that the two drunk guys were eating the food from the next room and were thinking of some outlandish ideas. Like some people came over from the next apartment, or the one guy who came with them but arrived literally 1 minute earlier ate it. I was already laughing in silence. Then one of the culprits woke up and asked them what was going on. Now they started to blame him again, but of course he was denying it. I didn't see him, but from his way of talking, I could tell he had the perfect poker face. He lasted for a good 15 minutes, but then he broke and confessed to everything. The others were obviously angry with him, but were asking why they ate all the food. He was thinking for a bit, but all you could hear him say with a weak and sorry voice was, "Because I was hungry." This was so genuine and hilarious that I could not keep up my facade anymore, and I drove myself off the bed, hitting the floor with a loud bang while I was laughing out loud. Story 14. A buddy of mine is black and married a white woman he met in college. The funniest part of this is he really is one of the softest dudes in the world. When he was in law school, we were out one night before another friend got married the next day, and we came back to their house to crash. He and his wife got into an argument. It was dumb, not a big thing. And there were four of us pretending to be asleep in the living room. My buddy drops, "Go run that shit on a white boy." Which, again, this dude is baby shit soft, and we all just busted out laughing at the same time. None of us could hold it in. It is still so funny to think about to this day. Story 15. When I was 16, at the end of school, in UK, we did a hike for the DOFE award. It went fine, and the hike itself, though a bit rainy, was quite pleasant. I had elected to bring my tent for 2 people in our group. The other guy and I had been friends for a couple of years. He was okay. Maybe a bit odd, but okay. Well, while we were heading to sleep, I stuck my head out to look at the stars and listen to the teachers chat because I'm nosy. They said some funny stuff, but nothing strange. Heard my tent mate shuffling around. Back inside, I started trying to sleep, felt the other guy put his hand near me, then shuffled sounds. Turned over. He put his hand back on me, at which point I turned to face him to tell him to stop, and saw him actively pleasuring himself while looking at me. What the hell, dude? He mumbled a sorry, then turned over. Not nearly as bad as most of these, but just f***ing weird. Story 16. After my son was born, I was laying in the hospital bed exhausted, and listening to my husband and best friend talk. This best friend was also pregnant, and lived with me and my husband for most of her pregnancy. Because my husband and I are different races, people actually often assume she was his wife and I was some sort of concubine or something. It didn't help that when they asked, I'd tell them we were an alternative lifestyle family. We weren't, but I thought it was funny. Anyway, none of that has anything to do with this story. I'm just setting the tone. So we're all in my hospital room. The baby is off for testing, and my husband and best friend are talking quietly while they think I'm asleep. That's when I hear it. The longest, loudest, wettest, most cartoony sounding fart noise of my young life. It went on forever. And after it came a long, awkward silence where I'm pretty sure my supposedly sleeping face became redder and redder. This sound, you see, was me, queefing out what I can only imagine to be all the air that had surrounded my son for 9 months. Then they started laughing, and I still had to pretend that I was asleep. I was mortified. To their credit, they didn't mention it when I woke up. Not right away, at least, but at some point when it finally did come up, I had to explain to them that it wasn't flatulence. Story 17. Backstory. My mom killed my biological dad in self-defense when he tried to beat the shit out of her for the upteenth time. She ended up an alcoholic from guilt. She remarried to the man that would then raise my siblings and I. He ended up divorcing her as soon as we turned 18. He protected us from her abuse. Of course, not before sexually abusing me. Mom passed away and brother passed a couple of years later, and the remaining 3 of us don't talk much after that for various reasons. Ironically, my reason was fear of losing someone close to me again, so I just put distance between us. So I was asleep, and I overheard my piece of ex telling his friend about how her mom killed her dad, her stepdad left and has nothing to do with her, and none of her siblings will have anything to do with her. I got out of bed and set the story straight. The lack of family in my life was hardly because I was a bad person, just a bad person trying to tell the story of my life. Story 18. I was asleep in the house of my recently deceased grandmother. Suddenly, at a very loud volume, was the cackling of two maniacal children right in the room. I totally myself and ran out of the room thinking it was the voice of my grandma trying to scare me. Turns out, I had left my PC on with my speakers set to loud, and my screensaver came on, which was the South Park Terrence and Phillip screensaver. Scared the crap out of me. Story 19. I was about 7 when my dad insisted all of us kids go to bed right now on Christmas Eve, because Santa wouldn't come if we were awake. I was pretending to be asleep in my bed shortly afterwards when my dad tiptoed into my bedroom and left my Christmas stocking hanging from my bedpost. That's how I found out. I never let on that I knew, not even to this day, half a century later. Story 20. This is the opposite of the question, but I was 12 and we were visiting my uncle. He and my mom were talking and catching up, and I woke up but pretended to be asleep. I felt the greatest rumbling in my guts because we'd gorged ourselves on dinner, and I ripped the most massive fart, not holding back. It was glorious, but I didn't want to handle the fallout, so I pretended to still be asleep, and his reaction was so hilarious. Good Lord, that gave me internal bleeding. I had to fight so hard not to laugh. It was great. I fell back asleep pretty quickly. Story 21. Not entirely the same, but similar. In my freshman year of college, I lived on a co-ed dorm floor, and at some point of the year, I had my room to myself. One of my room keys went missing, maybe a week or so after I lost it. At that point, they replaced my lock, and I got a new key. I'm laying in bed, and I hear a knock on my door. And at that time, I was suffering from depression and wasn't really up for interacting with anyone. So I didn't really say anything or open the door. And I pretended I wasn't there. But then I hear that it's a whole group of guys outside my door. One says something about finding my key still inside the lock in my door a while back and I guess he decided to just take it for himself. He knew my name and referred to me by name, even though I wasn't familiar with him. The other guys with him laugh about him having taken my key, and they joke around about it for a bit before I hear one of them try to put my old room key into the door. And when the door doesn't open anymore because the lock has been replaced, the guy abruptly drops the old key outside of my door, and I hear the group leave. Once they were gone, I finally opened the door, and sure enough, there was the key I had lost, right on the ground. And it wasn't until a little later that I came to the realization that those guys probably tried breaking into my room with that key when I wasn't around, or I was in class before the lock finally got replaced. God knows what they did in my room. Alright, I'm seeing the replies, and I'm just going to clear up here that it was probably only like 4 or 5 p.m. when this originally happened. I don't think the intentions were that drastic, especially given the time of day, but I'm assuming they were hoping I wasn't there, as I kind of suspect they may have possibly previously broken into Snoop. You know, to go through my drawers and stuff to look at my more personal items.